Okay, welcome back, everybody. And this is video 4 of year 3. And so in this video, I want to talk about how anxiety and assumptions go hand in hand, right? So when you make an assumption, you tell yourself that something is true without actually having the evidence that it is, right? You have to just kind of jump to a conclusion. Before I get into all of what assumptions are, I just want to, for me, it's important to understand how the brain works. And so one of those things is understanding that we make assumptions because it's at the basics, one of our survival components, right? If you hear new, it's safe to assume if you're on the edge um, of the street, that it's a possibility that a car whizzes past you, and don't step out into the street because that might be dangerous, right? So that's a good assumption to have. Same as if you were in a home and you hear glass breaking and it sounds like someone's trying to get in the door. It is reasonable to make an assumption that someone's trying to come in and hurt you. Call 911. Don't worry about if it's nothing. You don't want to stay there and find out if it's really something without having some kind of help. And so I just want to give you that biological basis so that you can understand the rest of what's happening, because sometimes people don't, they feel dramatic or they feel like something is wrong with them because the way anxiety just kind of operates in the brain. And so it's easy to lead your life just never questioning the things that you assume. Um, it's going to make for a very difficult life. And it just may not go well for you, right? So think about it this way, like it can really affect your quality of life, your self-esteem. So some of the examples are, if you don't get the promotion at work, so you assume you're not good at your job, right? That'll make some people quit. That'll make some people not want to move up. And you don't know, or you ignore what people are telling you, and you assume that you're not good. You assume that most people are bad at heart, so you don't trust anyone you meet. Um, your partner isn't very talkative, so lately, so you assume that they're angry with you. You assume big cities are dangerous, so you don't get a great job offer. Like all of those things, can affect you. You've made assumptions, right? You didn't get enough information. So why do we make assumptions? Um, so in some ways, the brain is designed to make assumptions. That goes back to that biological effect that I was talking about previously. It searches for patterns, right? Or what cognitive science call mental models to make it more efficient, to make it a more efficient machine. Excuse me. So, for example, you can walk to the station and take the train to the office without paying attention, but assuming it will be the same walk and platform as ever, leaving your mind free to efficiently organize tomorrow's dinner, right? It's the same way when you drive home from work. Some sometimes it's so automatic that if you say you need to go to the grocery store on the way home, sometimes you just forget to go because your brain is already set up in the pattern of driving home from work, right? But many of our assumptions are actually learned behavior. They come from our culture and our families and from what we were taught to think as children. We tend to take on our parents' assumptions, such as assuming that we do or don't deserve certain things, a good life, money, love, or we should or shouldn't do things, get married, practice a certain religion, wear bright clothes. That is so very true for me. I, for a very long time, would not wear a red dress to church, red lipstick, or nor would I go to church with bare legs. That is something that drove my grandmother up a wall, and for as long as I remember, nobody in the family did it. Um, so that's how we learned um, how to make those assumptions from her. So I guess in the way you would assume that everybody thinks that women of ill repute are the only ones that wear red lipstick, red dresses, and bare legs to church. So even if we grow up and learn to question the ways our parents think, we might still make the same assumptions like them because we approach relationships with others using patterns we're taught as children. I say this to my clients all the time. So, a good example is you might assume a good relationship means two people must always agree with each other. But that's not necessarily true. And how much of this would color your choices of a partner if this was your assumption, right? Not only that, it would cause trouble in the relationship. I just told a couple that this weekend because the wife said she felt like they should move the same. And I said, I don't know if moving the same is ideal. What about moving together? What does that make you think? And when she realized moving together made more sense because when they don't move the same, she's offended because now I have to defend my position. And it doesn't have to come down to that, right? So assumptions damage our capability to relate to others, right? If you're always assuming you know how others think and feel, you stop listening and communicating, and you leave people feeling misunderstood, and you leave them feeling just kind of emotionally trapped in this cycle with you. And sometimes they may not even understand like what's the difficulty here, right? So, in relationship difficulties, whether at home or work, can affect you, right? Like you'll start to feel depressed, you'll struggle with your self esteem, which will eventually increase your anxiety because you have to have a reason to um, feel the way you do about yourself. And typically, you're not going to identify it as, oh, I make assumptions, I should stop, because anxiety doesn't work like that. Anxiety makes those negative things you think as concrete evidence as to like their fact. So if you start to think, okay, people just don't like me, or people at work don't like me, I'm ineffective, I'm inefficient, anxiety isn't going to correct you. It's going to say, yep, you are. Let's come up with another catastrophe, right? So assumptions have a tendency to block possibilities, right? They impede your ability to think creatively, and get ahead. So if you assume the only way to do a presentation is with a PowerPoint, and the day it comes, the day the presentation comes, technology melts down, you're not going to be able to give that presentation because your assumption is that your presentation won't be any good unless you have PowerPoints, right? And a lot of times, if you haven't created some backup materials, you're really going to feel conspicuous, and your assumption is that going to be that the people in the office laugh at you or think you're just kind of inept, and that's going to cause problems. That's going to increase your negative thinking. Um, and you know that negative thinking is the thing that just feeds making those assumptions, right? Um, so how do you stop assuming? Well, one of the things you can do is spend some time watching for when you assume things. Sometimes writing them down. So I like this approach because I typically tell people like if you want to change something or if you want to identify a trigger, first do some internal research, right? Like what's going on with me? Um, why do I have this pattern of behavior? I remember changing certain things um, about myself like throughout my life. I don't know why I remember, probably because I've always been a growth and development kind of person. Um, I remember thinking, like, why are you doing that? Like, is there a reason you're doing that? And I may not have had the answer at the time, but I did ask myself the question. So start by just writing things down, evaluating your behaviors, and asking yourself why you're making those assumptions. So look for assumptions of all shapes and sizes, right? So something small like my spouse didn't do the dishes just to annoy me, is it just is just as possible to as a damaging, well, excuse me, I'm sorry, I got tongue tied there. That to me is just as damaging as a big assumption, right? Because once you feel like your spouse is doing something to annoy you, then that's going to change your behavior, right? So, and it might exacerbate your assumptions even more. So if they're doing this to annoy me, this must mean they don't love me anymore and they want to break up. Well, you're automatically going to start to feel defensive for some people, right? And so it's good to just, ask yourself these evaluative questions, figure out what's going on. Um, Two is ask good questions about your assumptions. So break down your assumptions. You need to ask good forward moving questions. So try to avoid why questions and go for the what and how questions, right? So, um, for example, what facts do I have to prove that this thought is true? That is one of the best questions to ask because that has to do with reality checking. What's the reality here? Because anxiety is more times than not false and imaginary and irrational, right? So, what facts do I have to prove that this thought isn't true, right? So, if I think that I am dumb, I'm going to fail this exam. What facts do I have that this isn't true? Well, I'm getting an A in the class. My last exam, I got a 99 on it. How is that true? Why would I make the leap or the assumption that I would fail if this is my track record? That makes no sense, right? So, what is more realistic? This is the third question you can ask yourself. In the middle way of seeing this, right? Because sometimes when you go from that really pessimistic assumption to that really optimistic assumption of everything will be all right, it's all flowers and roses, most people aren't going to accept that, right? So if you can do some middle of the way thinking, middle of a way fact checking, that will help. Four, is this really my opinion or did someone else teach it to me and I didn't question it? That goes back to the example of my grandmother and the red lips, the red dress, and the bare naked legs, right? I don't know, especially since it's this day and age, like nobody really cares the way you go to church, especially if most have the mantra come as you are, who cares if you're coming in there with red lips, red dress, and bare legs? Not that big of a deal. Get in the church, get what you need, and get out. The same way with these dangerous assumptions we make about other people, like culturally or ethnically, like did we teach ourselves that or did our parents do that? Like there's a lot of social media stars right now that are having difficulty navigating things that they put on social media because they made these broad assumptions about other people. So five is this even really what I think or want to think in the future? So I think that's a good question because again, coming from the perspective of growth and development, I will always ask my question, is this something I want to continue? Is this comfortable for me? And so when you ask yourself about continuing assumptions, more than likely that answer is going to be no, because assumptions are really uncomfortable and that anxiety that comes with it is I mean, is equally uncomfortable and sometimes your brain spirals. So what if this assumption didn't exist at all in my life? What would I be then? So if I didn't assume that I was dumb or not good enough, then what would I be? I think that's a great question because what it does is it gives you an opportunity to look at the things that are good about you, right? So if I'm determined, if I'm hardworking, if I am a problem solver, if I love strategy and I can think well on my feet, That person, if I didn't think I was dumb, I could do all of those things I just named effectively, meaning I wouldn't second guess myself, or I wouldn't, limit myself because I understood that, okay, I'm not dumb. I'm all these things. So I can move on whatever project, whatever work the teacher gives me with full confidence because I know who I am. So I love those questions. Try to ask yourself those questions when you find yourself anxious and making assumptions, especially when you don't have information, right? Agree to not have control of everything. This is a beautiful one, right? A lot of assumptions are about wanting to control life out of a false idea that it'll make you feel safe if you have control on the things around you, control of things around you, right? So this is based off an assumption, again, and core belief that if the world isn't safe in the first place, right? So the world is not an unsafe place. It can be an unsafe place, but overall, it's not an unsafe place. So, for example, because you can't control what others think, and this might feel scary, you assume that you know what they think. You assume that the neighbors find you lazy, and you assume that your teenage daughter hates you, right? That's an example for just a random example, right? So you assume all these things, but you don't know that to be true because if you have a teenage daughter, if she comes in and she's curling up and she's talking to you nonstop like teenage girls have a tendency to do, no shade. If she's coming in and she's talking to you and she's relating to you, more than likely, she does not hate you. She's just a teenage kid that has mood swings. And then the other part of that is one, your neighbors might not think you're lazy. Honestly, they may not pay enough attention to you to have an impression of you because, believe it or not, most people spend most of their time thinking about themselves. And again, not in a self centered way, but in the way that, to keep themselves safe, I have to think about myself in order to ensure my safety. And that goes back to just a biological way of thinking. So it's a great method to drop a ton of assumptions all at once, right? You don't have to hold on to those assumptions. You can just let them go because, again, you understand that they're fueling your anxiety. So, what if I don't need to know the answer about this person in this situation? How much stress could I relieve myself of just by agreeing in this moment to not know what I can't know, right? So, this is kind of similar, but I guess I don't know. Um, so there, a long time ago, someone sent me like this really rude text, right? Um, I don't know, I can't remember exactly, but it was pretty bad, and I guess they were really mad at who they were trying to message. I knew it wasn't me because I had never had any negative interactions with this person, and as far as I know, we were fine. So because I never had any interactions with them, and I knew from what I knew we were fine, I deleted the message and I just kind of kept it moving. I never mentioned it to another soul. And so the person that sent it to me was a friend of a friend. And so later on, they went out to lunch, and later on, I mean weeks. They went out to lunch. The person mentioned it to my friend, and my friend said, well, she probably just ignored it. And I did, because if I had made the assumption that she was mad at me, I could have shut off a nasty text, or the next time I saw her, I could have been very rude. All these things. When none of that would have been true, she just made a mistake and messaged me and didn't realize it until later. And then when she realized it, she was embarrassed. So none of that had anything to do with me. I just didn't. I just ignored it. It wasn't that big of a deal. And so it also saved me some anxiety or some uncomfortable feelings because I absolutely knew had nothing to do with me. So look for places that you feel stuck when it comes to making these assumptions. If you aren't sure you're making assumptions, or you're or you feel like you're just too smart to make an assumption in a place, then look where you feel stuck, right? Inevitably there will be an assumption hiding out or holding things up. So if you feel like you're not making an assumption, like think about your friendships. What are you assuming about the sorts of people you like? What are you assuming about the kinds of places you want to meet these friends? And what are you assuming friendships involves in the first place? I just had a client recently. She went to a friend's bachelorette party, and there were other friends um, of her friend there. And so they weren't the type of people that she really likes, right? There, but when she went in, she wanted them to like her. So she assumed that she had to behave a certain way to get them to like her. When towards the end of the session, the realization was they're not really people I want to make a relationship with anyway. So it really doesn't matter if they like me. And so, because everything she assumed they would like actually made them think she was annoying and they didn't want to really make a connection with her at all. So, one of the things you want to do is um, just, be aware of what it is you want, be aware of how it is you feel so that you just be sure, right? Just be sure because you can't again make an assumption about assuming. Just stick with the facts, ma'am. So there's also, excuse me, something called preemptive problem solving, right? So we typically engage in this type of guessing when we're feeling insecure about recent interactions, right? So the thing I just named about the bridesmaids, the bride's friends, was something similar, right? We launch into this series of overthinking patterns which are focused on preemptive problem solving to attempt to make predictions about outcomes, right? So here's the problem with this preemptive problem solving, because this goes along with the assumptions and the anxiety, right? You problem solve about how a particular person will respond verbally or actively to a situation that takes up a lot of mental bandwidth, right? You play an entire chess game in your mind and create multiple like scenarios. It's super exhausting, but it provokes more anxiety instead of reducing it because you have to think of like 10 or 12 or 5 or 6 or however many scenarios you think in your head and how to respond to them when none of them might be true, right? Two, preemptive problem solving yields solutions to a problem like I said, which were never problems that needed to be solved. The problem only existed in your mind by the exchanges you've had with others, which was not based on, well, no, by exchanges you've had in your head, which are not based on hard evidence. In fact, there's no scientific data or research to support that preparing for a problem beforehand is an effective solution to problem solving. It is not. It is not effective at all. So another thing is, lastly, that preemptive problem solving changes future interactions with individuals in questions, right? With the individuals in question. I'm so sorry about this tongue tied um lesson here. I'm so glad you guys have hung on for this long with me tripping over words, but it's too late to go back. So we're gonna power through. So, when we engage in mental chess games about conflicts with people and assume how they will react, it will affect our next interaction with that person. Same example I used with the lady who sent the text. If I assumed that she meant that text towards me, that definitely would have changed the dynamics of our relationship and we wouldn't have been able to work together professionally later on. So even if nothing has happened yet, it can cause confusion. And the other person may question why our demeanor has changed and how we're acting differently. I know there's been a time you made an assumption about a friend and you've changed your behavior accordingly. And that friend is like, this is weird. What has happened? What did I do? And what may happen for some friends, they may say, you know what, I'm going to pull back because I don't know what's going on and I don't like the shade that's coming my way, right? So, 3 steps to just kind of avoid the preemptive problem solving is: one, know that it's critical to employ, like it's going to cause some frustration, some tolerance issues, and some patience, right? So that anxiety is going to cause you to be frustrated, lower your tolerance, and sap your patience. But you want to wait until something tangible happens before you even put all of those in play, right? Especially in social situations, because we make a lot of inferences, sometimes, again, based on the way we feel about ourselves or things that we've learned in the past. And sometimes we need to just come into those situations open, right? So, remembering to ask yourself, is there evidence to support my concerns, right? Is there evidence that these people mean me harm, that they don't find me charming and engaging, which is what I like to think of myself. So, um, 2 is, if you notice yourself engaging in mental chess games, remind yourself of the trifecta of problems they cause: mental exhaustion, useless problem solving, and negative social impact. All 3 can really cause negativity and derail your ability to resolve problems in actual time. Also, it will stop you from communicating and asking questions. A lot of times, like, a lot of our assumptions can be um alleviated if we just ask questions, right? So I always think about weighing my options, right? So if I'm having all of this difficulty with making these assumptions and it's causing me to feel anxious and I feel uncomfortable and I feel all these things, I feel like it would be less time and energy to just go ahead and ask the question that makes me anxious. And then I can get over things quickly, have the information I need, and then operate from that. So it's almost like I'm just picking which ones will cause me the least anxiety, right? That's what I want to do. So lastly, like, if you overthink a challenging social situation, don't panic, right? Use meditation. um, a lot of times when we assume in a situation, if we're overthinking, we have a tendency to overcorrect. But if you use meditation, you can stop, you can quiet your brain, you can ask yourself questions, you can feel what you're feeling, like in what areas am I feeling it? Why am I uncomfortable? You can just figure out a lot in that quiet meditation. Um, mindfulness. Mindfulness and meditation are great ways to just kind of connect to your body, to understand what you're feeling, to ask yourself questions, and then ask yourself what it is you need and want are the key questions, right? I Distraction is a technique, right? That'll help you calm down, right? So that you won't hyper focus on whatever social situation just caused you to assume and overthink. However, I don't want you to stay at the distraction, because if you have difficulty with compartmentalization, distraction will only help you compartmentalize and not address the situation because you feel more comfortable not addressing it, right? So we want to make sure that we don't engage in overthinking, right? If you see someone across the room and you say, hey, excitedly, and they just kind of it looks like they're rolling their eyes at you. I mean, you're across the room. It looks like they're rolling their eyes at you and then they just kind of walk away. You can make the assumption that person is, mad at you or you did something wrong, but you can also make the assumption that everything is fine and that person just didn't see you, right? One of those assumptions will cause a great divide in your relationship. The other one will start a communication. And so ask yourself, which one would you rather? Would you rather start the communication or would you rather start the conflict? I don't know about you, but I would much rather start the communication. Um, and, communication can be uncomfortable, especially if you're operating in assumptions. But before you have the communication, remind yourself, You don't know any of what in your brain is true. And the person that you're going to have this conversation with is going to confirm what it is you feel is happening, right? Because there are a lot of times people will convince themselves something is the absolute truth. And if someone tells them they're wrong, they'll still say, I'm not wrong. I believe what I believe. And it's like, okay, you believe what you believe, and I'll go over here in the land of sane and I'll live out my days with other people who believe in sanity. So, anyway, so we're all done here. I will see you guys in the next video. Well, talk to you in the next video. That would be less awkward. And you guys have a good rest of your day, and I'll see you next time. Bye.